Have you ever returned home only to feel that your mother is hiding a terrifying pain? For Captain Nia Kamau, fresh from months of overseas duty, the real battle begins not on a distant battlefield, but in her own living room, against a man the world praises as the perfect husband. The shocking truth: the man behind her mother's declining health may be the very one she trusted most. While neighbors praise Kwame's devotion, behind closed doors, he hurls insults and dirty water at Nia's frail mother, Amma, calling her a parasite. But Nia doesn't confront him with rage. She wages war with something far stronger: undeniable truth. As a military officer trained to dismantle lies, she launches a silent investigation. What follows is a masterclass in justice: hidden recorders, timestamps, and a public family dinner that turns into a courtroom. In just one evening, she exposes it all: abuse, betrayal, and even an affair, with evidence no one can deny. Audio recordings, surveillance footage, and a moment so powerful, it silences an entire room. If you've ever suspected someone you love is suffering in silence, you need to see this. Because sometimes, truth is the strongest weapon of all. Under a thin crescent moon, the iron latch on the front gate groaned open, and Nia Kamau slipped into the yard, as though returning from a battlefield. Her boots sank into the damp soil, the weight of months spent in the desert still clinging to her shoulders. She had traveled halfway across the world for this moment, for the relief of stepping into her own home again. But the silence that greeted her felt heavier than the duffel bag sliding from her arm. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn tight, and only the hum of cicadas broke the night. She reached for the key but hesitated. The door was already unlocked. Her chest tightened, a soldier's instinct pulling her senses taut. She eased it open. The hinges protested with a long whine, and stale air brushed her face like a warning. Inside, the house was smothered in shadow. Dust particles floated like faint ghosts in the faint line of moonlight, and beneath it all came the sound. Ragged, hollow, a cough buried in the back of a throat. Her training took over. Bag at the threshold, she planted her boots firm, eyes adjusting, shoulders squared. Every corner was scanned, every shadow measured. The cough came again, nearer this time. She braced herself for the figure that might emerge, an intruder, a stranger. Perhaps her husband standing to welcome her. But the form that staggered out of the gloom stopped her breath. It was not Kwame. Amma appeared, small and fragile against the yawning dark. Her hair, once a proud crown of gray, had thinned and curled around her face in wiry strands. Her nightdress clung loosely to her thin frame, the hem brushing her bare feet. She gripped the door frame as though it alone held her upright. The cough bent her in two before she straightened with trembling effort. Nia's heart dropped. She had braced for combat, but not for this sight. The woman who had raised her, now shrunken, fragile, waiting in shadows. She let out the breath she had held, stepped forward, and caught her mother before she could sway again. Amma's body was warm but weak, the bones sharp under the thin fabric. "Mother," Nia whispered, the word breaking in her throat. Her cheek brushed Amma's hair, and she inhaled the faint scent of eucalyptus oil, the old remedy Amma used to rub into her chest whenever winter nights grew heavy. That familiar smell should have soothed her, yet now it felt like incense from a shrine, as if something sacred had already been surrendered. She expected another presence, a voice rising from another room, the heavy steps of Kwame rushing forward, surprised but joyful. But the house stayed empty, silent but for Amma's labored breath. No lights flicked on, no warmth of welcome. Her husband, her partner, her companion in vows, was absent. Amma clung to her daughter's sleeve, eyes wet, mouth working as though to explain. But the cough returned, harsher now, and no words formed. Nia pressed her close, lowering her onto the couch, though her gaze swept the room again, searching corners. Photographs lined the wall, wedding pictures of her and Kwame, smiling in frames polished bright. His face looked out from every angle, the devoted husband, the man admired by neighbors and blessed by the church. But the house itself gave another testimony. Cold kitchen tiles untouched by recent meals, laundry piled in the basket, the bitter tang of mildew hanging in the air, her chest filled with dread. She had lived among distant deserts where the wind whispered of war, but nothing there had chilled her like this silence. She stroked Amma's hair, eyes burning, feeling the tremor that ran through her mother's frail hands. Amma forced a smile as though to reassure her, but it faltered quickly, replaced by an exhaustion that seeped deep. The night ticked onward, every sound amplified, the ticking clock on the wall, the distant bark of a dog, the whistle of wind through the half-broken shutters. Each noise seemed to say the same thing. Something had gone wrong here while she was away. And where was Kwame? The man everyone called righteous. The man whose laughter carried at church gatherings, whose hands were photographed painting school fences, whose arms lifted groceries for the old. Where was he on this night of all nights, the night his wife returned home alive and whole? Nia closed her eyes, holding her mother's trembling body tighter. Memories of training rose unbidden, the words of instructors telling her that silence can hide both safety and danger, that shadows can cloak both friend and foe. She had learned to listen beyond noise, to trust the tremor of instinct. And instinct screamed now. This house was not as it seemed. Amma shifted, her breath uneven. Her head rested on Nia's shoulder, light as paper. Nia's fingers brushed the edge of her sleeve, and in that moment she felt the faintest tremor ripple through Amma's arm, like a flinch left unfinished. The movement lodged in her chest, sharp and unbearable. She wanted to ask, but her mother's lips pressed shut, silence stronger than any answer. She leaned back, studying Amma's weary face, and the truth stared back at her. Not in words, not in confessions, but in the pallor of her skin, in the way her eyes darted as though to avoid some unspoken secret. The door to the bedroom stood ajar, dark and empty. No shoes by the mat, no coat slung over the chair, no echo of Kwame anywhere in the home. The world outside praised him. They would tell her tomorrow of his faithfulness, his charity, his unwavering devotion. Yet here, in the very heart of their shared life, his absence roared louder than any welcome. Nia pulled the blanket over her mother, her hand trembling as she tucked it under Amma's chin. For a long moment she simply watched her, the lines etched deep on her mother's face, the tears that had dried at the corners of her eyes. Then she rose and walked slowly to the window. The moon cast pale light across the yard, silvering the fence posts, glinting off the rusted latch. Beyond, the village lay hushed, roofs stretching into the distance like crouching beasts. She stood there, body still, listening. The night offered nothing but its silence. Yet she felt it then, an invisible presence pressing down, a weight in the air that clung like smoke. Her throat tightened. She thought of all the times she had marched into danger, her life in the hands of comrades, her mind clear and steady. Yet now, standing in her own home, she felt a chill crawl her spine. a sense that war had followed her back, not in the form of bullets or bombs, but in something more insidious. She turned back, watching her mother sleep fitfully, coughing into her hand. That fragile body bore more than sickness. It bore secrets. Her jaw clenched, and she whispered into the darkness, not a vow of vengeance, but of vigilance. She would uncover what had hollowed this house, what had drained her mother's strength, and she knew the path ahead would not be fought with weapons or commands, but with patience, with eyes sharp as a hawk's, with silence as her shield. The clock struck once, echoing hollowly through the house. Amma stirred but did not wake. Nia leaned down, pressed her lips to her mother's forehead, and closed her eyes against the sting of tears. The night swallowed her exhale. The room settled again into stillness, but within Nia's chest the storm only began to rise. She wrapped her arms tighter around her mother and let the dread seep in fully, undeniable, unrelenting. She had come home expecting rest. Instead, she had walked onto a different battlefield, and in the hollows of that house, hidden behind the walls that once promised safety, something dark and dangerous waited. Her mother's body trembled once more, and Nia held her close, staring into the darkness. A truth was buried here, and though she could not yet name it, her soul recognized its shape. It would not remain hidden forever. The house gave no answer, but she felt it, the pulse of a secret pressing against the silence, waiting to break. Morning cracked open with the shrill cry of swallows and the rasp of the front gate. Sunlight fell across the floorboards in a thin surgical line. Nia had barely slept. She sat on the edge of the couch with her boots off, one hand resting on her mother's blanket, listening to Amma's breath rise and fall in shallow waves. The door swung wide. A burst of color and fragrance rushed in, as if the day itself had stepped through the threshold. Roses, bright, expensive, thorns clipped, stems wrapped in glossy paper. Kwame filled the doorway like a poster. Crisp shirt, pressed slacks, the little church pin at his collar catching the light. His smile was the kind that owned rooms. "What a surprise," he said softly, as though the house had been waiting for this exact moment. "You didn't tell me you were coming home." He crossed the room in sure strides and set the bouquet on the table. The flowers leaned toward the light as if they had memorized where to look. He gathered Nia into a careful hug that didn't quite touch her shoulders, then bent toward Amma with practiced tenderness. "Mama," he whispered, "you look lovely this morning." His fingers brushed her temple. His hand lingered there too long. Nia watched the flowers. The scent of roses climbed into the air, sweet and high. Beneath it, a trace of bleach clung to his cuffs. He pulled the curtains wide. The room flooded with brightness until the last traces of the night fled under the couch. Nia blinked against the glare. It made everything look cleaner than it was. "Long flight," he added, moving smoothly into the kitchen, pulling out cups as though this were routine. "I got up early for the prayer circle. Phone was off. Must have missed your message." He glanced over his shoulder, grin easy as a handshake. "You know how people worry if I don't show." He set water to boil. The kettle trembled. Amma shifted under her blanket and managed a small smile. Nia took her mother's hand and squeezed. The bones were bird-light. Kwame moved like a man on stage, painless, precise. He found the orange marmalade she'd left 3 months ago and scraped the top layer, as if nothing ever spoiled. Every gesture was soft enough to leave no bruise, loud enough to be seen. By mid-morning, the doorbell kept tumbling its little song. One neighbor, then two, then more. Laughter rolled down the hall like marbles. Faces framed the doorway, eyes bright, voices warm. "He told us you were coming soon," someone said, clasping Nia's arm. "He keeps this house steady while you serve, a blessing." Another offered a covered plate. "He cooks for the food drives, too, a gift to the community." And then the phones came out, screens lifting like flowers turning toward the sun. "Look," a young man said, elbow nudging a woman beside him. He held his phone toward Nia. A photo glowed on the glass. Kwame kneeling beside Amma's chair, a cloth at her brow, a bowl of water on the table. Amma looked tired, but the frame had caught the moment of softness perfectly. His hand gentled, mouth tender, eyes lowered in devotion. The caption floated beneath it in neat, righteous letters, caring for her mother-in-law as if she were his own. Hearts bloomed across the bottom, red, purple, blue. Shares, comments, prayers folded into digital light. Nia's throat tightened. She studied the edges of the photo. The towel in the bowl was too clean. The water held no ripple. The cloth on Amma's forehead was positioned like a prop, square and centered. In the background, the clock on the wall showed a time she knew she and her mother were alone. A simple thought walked through her mind and left footprints, staged, timed, polished. She smiled anyway, because that was what the room required. "We're so blessed to have him," an older woman breathed. "He leads the Tuesday group. He's talking about a roof repair fund, too. And the youth choir. Oh, the way he encourages them. He says all the right words." She squeezed Nia's shoulder, eyes misting. "You chose well." Nia nodded, polite, grateful, careful. The bouquet on the table sent out its ceaseless perfume. Roses were used in funerals. The thought arrived without warning and sat down in her chest. Kwame moved among the visitors like a lit candle, passing warmth from face to face. He refilled cups, asked after children by name, laughed at small jokes in the right places. When his hand touched a shoulder, the shoulder squared. When he bowed his head to the pastor's wife, she beamed. Amma tried to sit up straighter, then sank back, breath snagging. He caught that too and adjusted her pillow with a tenderness that broke into applause from the room. A murmur, quiet and unanimous. What a man! The door closed behind the last guests close to noon. The house fell into a hush that hummed with the echo of praise. Nia opened a window for air. The sun had shifted, the shadow of the mango tree feathering the floor. She touched one of the roses and felt its cool, perfect skin. Its head bent under its own splendor. Kwame stood at the sink washing the good cups, sleeves rolled above the wrist. The bleach scent lifted again. He caught Nia's glance and winked. "You see? People worry when you're away. Who else would keep things running?" Her mouth half opened. She closed it again. She thought of the unlocked door last night, of her mother's cough, of the way the kitchen tiles had felt unused beneath her feet. She reached for a dish towel and dried the cups, watching his movements. He turned plates into soldiers, lined them tight, edges kissing edges. When he finished, he wiped the sink in neat circles until his face looked back from the steel in a dim halo. "Let's make the evening special," he said. "A welcome home. I'll charm the neighbors into lending us that long table. We'll celebrate properly." His tone landed somewhere between offer and decree. Nia swallowed. "I'm thinking a quiet night might be good for her." "For her," he agreed gently. "We will keep it simple. But for the people?" He smiled. "They need to rejoice. They need to see what they believe in." He didn't look at her as he spoke. He looked at the window, at their garden, at the thin strip of path he kept swept clean. In the afternoon, he slipped out to collect favors from the block. When he returned, the table followed him in the arms of two teenagers, their faces lit with the pride of being included. He thanked them by name and pressed coins into their palms. He set out plates, folded napkins into tidy triangles, aligned the silverware with the edges of the table as though drawing boundaries. Nia held Amma's hand and felt the fine tremor pulsing there. Her mother watched the preparations with an expression Nia could not read, something like relief and dread tangled together. The first neighbors arrived with the cool of evening, voices softened by dusk, a small tin speaker playing hymns. The smells of pepper stew and grilled fish rode the air, warm and familiar. Someone fluffed the roses. Someone adjusted a chair, then another. When the pastor's wife appeared at the gate, Kwame straightened, and the whole yard seemed to straighten with him. He led her to the head of the table and pulled out her chair. She blessed the food with a voice that folded the night like prayer. They served Amma first. Kwame knelt as he had knelt in the photograph, lifting a spoon to test temperature. The guests watched with softened eyes. He blew across the surface and nodded, satisfied. The spoon hovered near Amma's lips. She looked at Nia. Nia smiled reassurance. Amma took a small sip and coughed once, a trapped sound that she swallowed. Nia tried to let the simple things anchor her. The scrape of a chair, the scratch of a cricket, the fluoride sparkle of the overhead bulb. She let the rhythm of voices pass over her. Weather, work, the price of oil, the new family on the far street. The talk curved, as it always did, back to goodness, back to gratitude, back to the man who lived inside the photographs on their walls. "You should have seen him last week," a neighbor said, leaning forward. "Up on the ladder in that heat, fixing the church awning with his own hands. He wouldn't accept a coin in return. Always the first to give, that one," someone added. "Always the last to leave after we sweep." Kwame shook his head, embarrassed. "It is nothing." Everything about the scene felt friendly, safe, right. Nia studied the arrangement as if it were a map. The light favored him. The table centered him. Even the hymns in the background seemed tuned to his key. She looked down at her plate and realized she had not tasted a single bite. When the plates were cleared and the little speaker traded hymns for softer instrumentals, the evening tilted toward warmth. Night pressed its cheek against the windows. A breeze picked up and flipped the corner of a napkin like a white wing. Kwame poured water into Amma's glass, then took the seat across from her. He leaned back, palms flat on the table, and the low light caught the fine sheen on his forehead. Amma's spoon trembled against the rim of her bowl, a small sound, not loud enough for the table, loud enough for Nia. Her mother's eyes darted from the spoon to the edge of the table, then to Kwame's hands. Invisible threads tightened through the air. He turned his gaze toward Amma. It was nothing, just a look from one person to another across a table. It lasted no longer than a heartbeat, but in that heartbeat his face emptied. The warmth drained clean away. His mouth thinned. His eyes flattened like cooled iron. It was contempt so pure it left no trace on the skin, only a temperature change in the room. It was private cruelty delivered in plain sight. The spoon slipped from Amma's fingers and rattled against porcelain. A few heads turned. Kwame's smile returned as quick as light. "Careful there," he said lightly, reaching to steady the bowl. "It's slippery tonight." Laughter, a gentle communal tide. The moment folded itself back into the general noise and lay there as if nothing had happened. Nia's back prickled. She had seen men shift faces in war. She knew the sound a mask made, even when silent. She lifted her glass and found her hand unsteady. The water slapped the rim and wet her knuckles. She set the glass down. Her fingertips left prints on the clear. Later, when the last guest drifted home and the long table lay bare under the bulb, Kwame stacked plates in sets of 4 and carried them to the sink. The house tasted of dish soap and charred edges. The roses drooped, heavy-headed, as if exhausted by standing beautiful. Amma had fallen asleep in her chair, her breath thin as thread. Nia covered her knees with a shawl. A thread caught on Amma's ring and snapped with a sound so slight it felt imagined. Kwame stood at the window, wiping his hands on a towel. The glass reflected him in a dark double, the night laying his features over itself. "I'm grateful you're home," he said softly, not turning. "It's been hard with the community needing so much, but we manage, don't we?" He glanced at the roses, at the neat stack of plates, at the photograph on the wall where his arms circled Nia's waist. The room seemed to nod along with him. He placed the towel down in a measured fold. She didn't answer. Words felt like currency she should not spend yet. She watched his hands again, the way his fingers pressed the towel flat, how he smoothed a corner 3 times, then aligned it with the counter seam. Perfect, crisp, obedient. Her mother exhaled. The sound wavered and settled. The clock on the wall clicked from 1 minute to another, counting something that wasn't time. He crossed to Amma and adjusted the pillow with that warm, public tenderness. "Rest well," he murmured, so soft the words almost did not exist. He brushed the blanket edge as if closing a book. In the bedroom, he lifted the corner of the bedspread to test for dust, checked the closet, straightened a hanger. When he turned back to her, his face carried the smoothness of a good man's relief. "We'll be fine now that you're here," he said. "Everything will be easier." She nodded, and for an instant something like gratitude bloomed in his eyes, quick and bright as a match. Then it went out. The house grew quiet. A late motorcycle hummed down the road and vanished. Somewhere, a dog barked once and thought better of it. Nia moved through the rooms, turning off lights one by one, until only the kitchen lamp remained. She stood beneath it and inhaled the last of the roses. The sweetness caught in her throat. She opened the window for night air. The curtains breathed in and out. The sound of distant singing drifted from a block away, a hymn about mercy traveling through the dark like a boat. She turned. Kwame had left his phone on the table. The screen woke under her gaze. Notifications bloomed and faded. A new comment on the photo. "Bless you for honoring her." A handful of hearts rose and disappeared like fish breaking water. The timestamp marked yesterday afternoon, while she was still in the air over the ocean, the day before her arrival. The room angled slightly, as if the floor had shifted beneath her feet. Amma stirred at the sound of the window latch. Nia went to her and knelt. The blanket whispered under her hands. Her mother opened her eyes, murky with sleep, and tried a smile. The skin at her temples shone with a fine, clammy sheen. Nia brushed back a strand of hair and found herself pressing her palm to that beloved forehead, as if she could seal something inside before it escaped. Behind her, the bouquet rustled. One petal loosened and fell to the table with the quietest paper sound. She looked back and watched it land, a small silky scythe on wood. She thought of the look across the table. She thought of the unlocked door last night. She thought of neighbors' voices. She thought of the way the photo had captured a perfect act and none of its context. She thought of a man who could pull a room around himself the way some men pull on coats. She tucked the shawl more snugly around her mother's knees. "Sleep," she whispered. "I'm here." She carried the wilted petal to the trash, then stopped. No. She slid it into her pocket instead and closed her fist around its thin softness. The petal clung to her palm like a secret. Outside, the breeze lifted, a whispering hand through the mango leaves. Inside, the air held still, a held breath. When she turned off the kitchen lamp, the house changed again. The shapes of furniture moved closer. The ceiling lowered. She took one step, then another, and found the hallway seeming longer than it had ever been. Her shoulders squared without her telling them to. In the new dark, a glimmer from the phone lit the table's edge. More hearts, more blessings, praises pouring into a glass held up to the world. Nia stood there and let the glow run across her knuckles. Her face did not move, but inside her something set its feet and refused to shift. She went to the front door and tested the lock. Firm now. She slid the deadbolt. She stood a moment with her forehead resting against the wood, collecting the day like a field report in her bones. Then she returned to the living room and sat beside her mother again. Amma's breathing steadied under her hand, but even asleep, her brow pinched, as if against a remembered light. In the quiet, Nia finally allowed herself a private inventory. The clipped thorns, the bleach scent, the smiling photo and the wrong time, the look across the table sharp enough to cut a spoon from a hand. None of these things, alone, would convince a soul in that choir of neighbors. Together, they hummed. A single note right at the edge of hearing that made the glass in the cabinet vibrate. She closed her eyes and let that note settle in her chest. She would not rush. She would not accuse. She would not be a storm that could be explained away. She would be the air that drops pressure by degrees until everyone feels the change and can no longer deny it. The soldier in her knew patience. The daughter in her knew pain. The woman in her reached for both and gripped hard. She looked at the bouquet one last time. The roses were flawless. That was their weakness. Beauty that never bent was brittle. She imagined pressing a thorn into her thumb to prove something to herself, to feel sting and blood, an assurance that her body was still hers. Then she remembered they had been clipped. No thorns. Nothing left to hurt you, unless it was the perfume. Heady, too sweet, persistent. She rose and cracked the window wider. Night slid in with the smell of earth. Under it, faint as a signature, drifted the scent of eucalyptus from the little jar on the mantel. Her mother's remedy. A true smell, a clean line through a muddied room. Nia let the air wash her face. The petal in her pocket warmed to her skin. A motorcycle's taillight blinked twice at the corner and vanished. Somewhere, a neighbor laughed in a kitchen. Somewhere, a child sang 3 notes of a song and stopped. She stood at the threshold of her own house and saw it clearly for what it had become, a stage set with props arranged for applause. She let that recognition cut her. Not to bleed, to wake. Behind her, Amma shifted and murmured in her sleep, a soft wordless call that landed in Nia's chest like a stone in a pond. The ripples spread. They touched the roses. They touched the phone on the table. They touched the frames on the wall where happiness smiled down in permanent gloss. She turned back, crossed the room, and sat again. Her mother's hand was warm in hers, small and fierce. She squeezed once. Amma's fingers answered, the barest press of trust. Nia leaned her forehead to their joined hands and breathed. On the table, the phone lit again, bathing the roses in a cool blue glow. The caption glowed like a prayer. Bless you, bless you, bless you. The light faded. The room fell into honest dark. In that honest dark, she felt the truth rise, the thing that had waited in the walls last night and stood dressed in daylight this morning. It rose and stood in front of her, without a face, without a name. But its shape was unmistakable. She did not move. She simply acknowledged it. The most dangerous lies are the ones everyone wants to cheer for. Her jaw tightened. The air sharpened. She lifted her head and listened to the night hold its breath around her, and she understood with a clarity that hurt. The praise that wrapped them was not a shield. It was a cover, and covers can catch fire. She did not put words to it. Not yet. She pressed the petal to her palm until it creased and held. Then, with careful hands, she leaned back into the couch, guarding the small rise and fall of her mother's chest, and stared into the dark that was no longer empty. The bowl trembled in Nia's hand, steam curling upward, carrying the sharp scent of ginger and broth. She crossed the room slowly, each step landing on wood that creaked like a whisper. Her mother's sleeve slipped back as she reached for the bowl. For a heartbeat, the morning light caught what the fabric had hidden. Skin mottled in purples and greens, bruises blooming like diseased flowers. Nia froze. The spoon rattled against porcelain. Amma tugged her sleeve down quick, almost too quick for frail fingers. "I fell," she muttered, voice paper thin. "The floor in the kitchen is uneven. Don't fuss." She forced a smile, lips quivering at the edges, but Nia's gaze had already fastened on the mark, the way her mother's body curled slightly, as if bracing for another blow. She had learned in the desert to read signs, shadows in the dust, tremors in the air, before mortars fell. Here, too, the evidence was plain. Bruises do not lie. Her throat ached with words she could not let spill. She had been trained not to act on rage. You wait. You gather proof. You strike only when the truth can stand alone. She set the bowl on the table, fingers pressed hard against wood to steady herself. Amma's eyes darted toward the doorway as if expecting another figure to step through, then down again, retreating into silence. Nia reached for her hand, but Amma pulled it back under the blanket. A bird vanishing into its nest. The day stretched with uneasy calm. Sunlight moved across the walls, tracing time like a slow blade. Nia busied herself with small chores, her senses heightened, every creak of the floor, every groan of the shutters making her flinch. The bouquet of roses from yesterday sagged in their vase, petals already losing luster. They smelled stronger now, too sweet, masking the air. She wanted to throw them out, but she let them stand. They were his offering, his performance. Their slow decay spoke louder than if she had tossed them herself. When evening fell, silence weighed heavier. A dog barked down the street. Then another answered. The house echoed with emptiness. Nia sat at the kitchen table, her eyes on the shadows stretching long across the tiles. She told herself she would not sleep, but fatigue betrayed her, head lowering onto folded arms. It was the sound that woke her, a sharp splash, followed by a choked gasp. She rose instantly, muscles alert, feet silent on the floor. Through the dim light she saw him. Kwame towered over Amma, a bucket overturned in his hand, water dripping from its rim, spattering across the tiles. Amma's nightdress clung to her skin, drenched and sagging, her hair plastered to her forehead. She shivered, teeth clattering, eyes wide in terror. "Ah, you're useless," his voice hissed, words laced with venom. "A parasite, eating food that isn't yours, living under my roof like a ghost." His arm swung, and the empty bucket clanged against the counter. The noise cracked through the house like gunfire. Nia's breath caught. She pressed herself against the wall, body hidden in the frame of the hallway. Her pulse pounded in her ears loud as drums. Every instinct screamed to intervene, to pull him away, to shield her mother. But she stood still, every nerve tight, knowing this was the battlefield her commander's voice had warned her about. The kind fought not with rifles, but with timing, with evidence, with endurance. Amma whimpered, trying to rise from the chair, her frail arms trembling. Kwame leaned down, his face close, voice dripping contempt. You should have gone to the grave with your husband. You're nothing but dead weight now. He shoved the chair back, and Amma crumpled against the wall, water pooling beneath her like a dark mirror. Nia's hand clenched the doorway until her nails bit wood. Rage seared her throat, but she swallowed it, hard, burying the scream in her chest. She watched, memorizing each gesture, each word, burning it into memory like a brand. Kwame straightened, adjusted his shirt, and left the kitchen as if nothing had happened. His footsteps faded down the hall, door closing softly behind him. The house sank back into silence. Only the dripping water remained, each drop hitting the tiles like a slow metronome. Amma sat slumped, shoulders shaking, breath ragged. Nia stepped forward at last, her boots splashing into the puddle. She knelt beside her mother, wrapped her arms around her, pressed her forehead against the crown of gray hair, soaked with cold water. Tears stung her eyes, but they did not fall. Soldiers do not break in the field. She whispered nothing, only let the silence speak between them. Her hands rubbed warmth back into Amma's arms. She could feel her mother's bones trembling like reeds in the wind. Amma clutched at her sleeve, eyes darting with fear. "Don't," she rasped. "Don't fight him. Please, he'll—" She stopped, voice breaking into coughs, shoulders heaving with effort. Nia tightened her grip. She wanted to promise safety, but the words lodged in her throat. Safety here was fragile, balanced on the edge of exposure. One wrong move and he would vanish behind his mask again, untouchable. She thought of her training, every lesson drilled into her. The enemy hides behind illusions. You strip them away, piece by piece, until they stand naked before the world. Tonight, she had seen behind his mask fully, but it was not enough. She needed proof that would echo louder than neighbors' praise, louder than photographs, louder than roses wilting in a vase. Amma's head sagged against her shoulder. Nia brushed wet strands of hair from her mother's face and pressed her lips against her temple. The scent of eucalyptus still clung faintly to her skin, fighting the stench of dirty water. She sat there long into the night, rocking gently, letting her mother's shivers ease against her body. Her tears came then, quiet, hidden, sliding down her cheeks into Amma's soaked hair. In the shadows, her mind whispered vows. She would not rush. She would not storm. She would wait, watch, prepare. And when the moment came, she would strike with truth, sharper than any blade. Amma stirred, eyes flickering open. You'll protect me?" she whispered, voice small as a child's. Nia's throat closed. She could only nod, tears burning her eyes. The dripping slowed, then stopped. The kitchen lay in silence once more, but the silence felt different now, thicker, darker, filled with the weight of what she had witnessed. Nia lifted her mother into her arms, carried her gently to the couch, wrapped her in blankets. Amma curled into the warmth, still trembling, but a faint sigh escaped her lips as she drifted into uneasy sleep. Nia sat beside her, staring into the dark. Her body shook with contained fury. She pressed her palms together until the bones ached. The roses in the vase drooped lower, petals falling one by one onto the table. She watched them fall, each one a reminder that beauty can rot, that masks eventually slip. Her chest rose with a long, trembling breath. Tonight she had seen the truth unmasked. Tonight she had tasted helplessness deeper than any battlefield. And tonight she had sworn a new war, one not of weapons but of patience, of evidence, of timing. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. The tears smeared but did not vanish. Her eyes glowed in the dim light, fierce and unyielding. The house slept, but she did not. She sat there, holding her mother's frail hand, staring into the shadows that pressed against the windows, and vowed in silence that she would not falter. The night ended with her whispering into the dark, voice raw, steady, unshaken. "I'll bring him down, not with anger, with truth." Her hand clenched tighter around Amma's, a lifeline in the storm. And as dawn began to stir beyond the curtains, painting the sky in pale strokes, Nia's eyes remained open, burning with resolve. The battle had already begun, and she knew she would not fight it alone. The walls themselves had heard. The chapter closed with silence, but a silence heavy with promise, with grief, with the weight of war that would soon find its voice. The knock came just as Nia finished wiping down the kitchen counter. It was sharp, hurried, too cheerful for the gray hour of morning. She opened the door to find Zola standing there, smile wide, sunlight catching on the hoops in her ears. Her hair was braided tight, her dress bright, as if she carried the day with her. "Nia!" Zola's voice rang out, familiar and strange at once. She stepped forward before being invited, arms outstretched. "You're home, finally." Her embrace smelled of perfume, sweet and sharp, masking something sour beneath. Nia stiffened but allowed it, the weight of old friendship pulling her closer than she wanted. When Zola pulled back, her eyes darted over the room, taking stock of Amma's thin frame on the couch, the wilted roses in the vase, the faint dampness still staining the tiles. "I thought I'd come by to help," Zola said quickly, already moving toward the sink. "Amma shouldn't strain herself, and you must be tired from traveling." Her hands moved with practiced familiarity, stacking cups, brushing crumbs into her palm. It was the way a daughter would help in her own home, too natural, too sure. Amma forced a smile. "It's kind of you." Her voice wavered. She coughed, the sound muffled in her sleeve. Nia watched closely. Zola's movements carried memory. She knew where the spoons were, which drawer stuck, how to lift the latch on the back door without noise. This wasn't the fumbling of a guest. This was routine. And then Nia saw it. Zola bent to retrieve a rag that had slipped under the counter. As she stood, the hem of her bag shifted. A glint of metal caught the light. A key. Not just any key. Its head was identical to the one on Nia's ring, the one that opened this very house. Her chest tightened. She forced her voice calm. "That's a nice key chain." "New?" Zola's fingers brushed the keys, too casual. "Oh, this. Spare for my cousin's place. She travels a lot. You know how it is." She laughed, but the sound was brittle, floating just above the silence. Nia held her gaze longer than comfort allowed. Zola looked away first, setting the rag on the counter with deliberate precision. The day unfolded with forced warmth. Zola hummed as she swept the porch, as if she had done it 100 times. Kwame appeared at midday, his arrival loud with greetings, his arm slipping easily around Zola's shoulders. "Always helping," he said, voice coated in honey. "She's family here." Amma's cough thickened, but she turned her face toward the window, away from the tableau. It happened quickly, almost invisible. Nia caught it, the fleeting glance between Kwame and Zola, a flicker of recognition, too sharp, too intimate. Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat their mouths curved into matching half-smiles. It was there and gone, like a knife sliding back into its sheath. Nia's blood ran cold. She steadied herself against the table, nails digging into the wood. The room swam with the smell of roses rotting sweet in the vase, the clatter of cutlery, the shallow breath of her mother. All of it blurred into background against that single exchange of looks. Her world shifted. The friend she had trusted, the woman she had once shared secrets with under mango trees, was not merely a visitor. She was an accomplice, her presence sanctioned by the man who had already revealed his cruelty in shadows. Nia felt her heartbeat climb into her throat. She forced a smile, lips stiff. "Thank you, Zola," she said softly. "You've done enough." Zola tilted her head, eyes bright, unbothered. "I'll come again tomorrow. Amma needs me." Her tone was firm, ownership cloaked in kindness. She touched Amma's shoulder lightly before leaving, her perfume lingering in the hall long after the door closed. Kwame watched her go, the corner of his mouth twitching. He turned to Nia, expression polished, voice smooth. "We're blessed to have such loyal friends." Nia said nothing. Her eyes followed the fading swing of the curtain, her hand unconsciously brushing the pocket where last night's petal still rested. It crinkled softly under her touch, fragile yet unbroken. The evening descended heavy. Amma lay curled beneath her blanket, eyes half closed, but her hand reached for Nia's, clinging with quiet desperation. Nia stroked her fingers gently, her own breath tight. She had thought she was fighting one enemy, but now the shadows had multiplied. She leaned close, whispering into her mother's hair, voice low, trembling. "You're not alone. I see it now. I see them." The words dissolved into the dark, but her heart carved them into stone, and in the silence that followed, the image burned behind her eyes. Two faces bound by a secret smile, standing against her beneath the roof she once called safe. The house seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing tighter, the night air turning colder. She knew then, with a certainty that shook her to the core, that betrayal had been planted in her home long before she returned, and it had grown roots deep. She held her mother's hand tighter, her jaw set. The war she had prepared for was larger than she imagined, and she would not let it consume them without a fight. The recorder was no bigger than a matchbox, black, dull, a finger of shadow in her palm. Nia crouched by the low shelf in the living room and slid it onto the underside of the wood, the adhesive tape catching with a soft tack. The red light breathed once, then settled into a faint pulse, alive, listening. Sunlight was dying in the window. The house carried that late-hour quiet that made every small sound feel guilty. From the couch, her mother's breath rasped and eased and rasped again, a tired tide on a shallow shore. "Just a little longer," Nia murmured, kneeling beside Amma to tuck the blanket under her knees. "Please, I need something they can't deny." Her voice wasn't strong. It was careful, the kind of careful a soldier uses when a wire might be underfoot. Amma's fingers clung to her sleeve, thin and warm. She nodded once, the motion barely there. The eucalyptus jar on the mantel released its sharp, clean line into the room, fighting the heavy sweetness of the dying roses on the table. Another petal let go, drifting down like a hush. Nia stood and scanned the space with a tactician's eye. The living room. Common ground. Not a bedroom, not a bathroom. Nothing private to complicate what would come. The old wall clock ticked toward evening, its hands steady, its face an anchor. She ran through her checklist without looking like she was running through anything. The recorder was hidden. Its mic pointed toward the couch where Kwame liked to sit when he entertained. The thin throw rug under the coffee table muffled footsteps. The window latch was fixed. No sudden blows of wind to lift sound away. She placed her phone on silent and slid it into her back pocket. The spare USB drive lay cool and weighty under the tape she used to wrap it against the inside of her wrist. If she had to move fast, she could move fast. "Soup?" she asked. Amma nodded. In the kitchen the kettle sang. The same bleach-clean smell clung to the sink that had clung to Kwame's cuffs. She rinsed a bowl, dried it too carefully, caught herself, moved more naturally. When she carried the soup back, Amma's sleeve slipped. The ugly bloom under the skin flashed and vanished as Amma tugged the fabric down. The room seemed to tilt. Nia set the bowl, crouched, made her body smaller so her mother could feel larger. "We're almost there," she breathed. "Just a little longer." Amma's eyes shone with something like apology, and love and fear knotted together. Outside, a motorcycle gunned by the gate. Voices passed in soft pockets and faded. Evening slid in. The living room darkened to a pool, the edges of furniture becoming shapes, and then suggestions. Nia clicked on the lamp that cast a warm circle across the rug. The roses caught a rim of gold, their edges browned at the curl. She slipped her hand into her pocket, found the petal she kept there, and pressed it flat against her pulse. No thorns. That still bothered her. The front latch scraped. Then a key turned. Kwame's voice entered the room before he did. Bright, polished, perfectly pitched for doorways. "How are my ladies?" He came in with the same easy stride that made neighbors lift their chins when he walked by. He had flowers again, cheaper this time, daisies mixed with yellow sticks of something, wrapped in crinkly plastic that whispered as he laid it on the table. He was fresh from somewhere important, a meeting or a prayer group. He carried the righteous air that clings to people who have been told they are good all day. Behind him came Zola, hair newly braided, perfume a high note that sat on the air and refused to settle. "What a blessing to see you upright," Zola trilled at Amma, touching her shoulder with a hand that looked casual and wasn't. "I've been thinking of you all day." Her eyes flicked toward Nia. Warmth, then calculation behind it, as quick as a blink. Nia smiled and kept it even. "Tea?" She moved to the kitchen because the kitchen offered distance. The recorder's red pinprick hid under the shelf and watched the room. Every sensation sharpened, tile cool under the soles of her feet, lamp buzz a thin thread, the clock counting in steady steps. She poured water over leaves and listened for words like a hunter listens for brush noise. At first it was small talk, the weather, the youth choir, the way the church roof needed patching. She placed cups on saucers that didn't match and brought them out, hands steady. Kwame accepted his cup with a grateful smile and put it down untouched. His voice lowered, his shoulders eased. He leaned back into that couch corner as if claiming it. "There's talk," he said, glancing toward the door, then back. Secrets always start with glances. You know how people are. They see her like this. A small, dismissive nod toward Amma. They ask questions, It's an opportunity if we're wise. The word opportunity slid across the rug like oil. Nia kept her face away, hand on the back of a chair, eyes on the unsteady rim of tea. Zola's phone chimed, a bright, lilting melody, high-life guitar pick, 3 notes, a playful trill at the end. She fumbled, smiled an apology at no one, and flipped it face down on the table. The clock said 6:42. A radio 2 houses down stuttered to life, the local news jingle chiming out in the same cadence it always did, at the bottom of the hour. Time locked itself to sound. The recorder's little ear took it all in. But people trust me," Kwame continued. He sank those words into the cushion like an anchor. "If anyone asks why she's confused, why she's unpredictable, we say the doctor used a word for it." He shaped the word with his mouth like it tasted expensive. "Memory loss, age. You know how tender people become when they hear that." He lifted a hand. "We're protecting her dignity, of course. For her sake." Zola slid closer on the edge of her chair. "I can talk to the women's study group," she said. "They adore you. If I tell them she's not herself, they'll understand. And if she says anything inconvenient, we'll help them hear it the right way." Nia's jaw clenched until it clicked in her ear. She matched her breath to the second-hand sweep. In, out. The recorder under the shelf drew their words like thread through cloth. "And Nia?" Zola asked, voice dipped in sympathy. "People wonder why she's gone so much. It's not resentment, it's concern." She let the last word linger like perfume. "If anyone presses, we say she chooses her duty over her home, that she's doing God's work abroad while God's work here is being done by." She lifted her palm toward him, a toast without a glass. "Community," he said piously, but the corners of his mouth twitched. "And we are patient with her. Our love responds to absence with service." "This isn't kind," Zola added softly, as if rehearsing the future. "This is responsible." Amma coughed, a weak protest a child could have stepped over. Kwame turned his head and gave her that empty public smile. In it was a private message. "Do not speak." And in the next breath he turned to Zola again, warmth returning as if it had never left. "Sunday will be important. The pastor sees what I do. If something ugly surfaces, I tell him we're managing a delicate health matter. He hates scandal. He will fold it into prayer." Zola's phone chimed again, the same high-life trill. The clock clicked to 6:45. A dog barked and stopped as if scolded. Kwame leaned forward, elbows on knees now, voice lower, the temperature of his words falling a degree. "If she makes noise, we frame it as confusion. If the daughter defends her, we honor her courage. Then we shake our heads over the tragedy that career has made her a stranger. People love tragedy when it lets them feel wise." Nia's fingernails dug crescents into the wooden chair back. The eucalyptus cut through the perfume and the stale rose sweetness and kept her upright. The recorder's light did not move. It didn't need to. It only needed to listen. Zola's knee brushed his. The touch was light. "And if someone asks about us," she whispered, mouth barely moving, "you know they will." Kwame exhaled a small laugh that never reached his eyes. "They won't. But if they do, we deny with sorrow. We say rumors are a disease that blinds people to goodness, and we keep doing good in front of them. That cures most infections." Zola smiled. "You're very good at this." He sat back, pleased. "She'll never know," he said then, low and confident, like a judge pronouncing an outcome. The words shivered the air. Nia felt them pass through her. She didn't move. The clock swallowed another minute. They didn't linger. Good conspirators know not to linger. Zola stood with a lift of her shoulder that made her look harmless. Kwame scooped up the cheap bouquet and switched it with the dying roses, tossing the brown-headed flowers into the trash with 2 fingers. "Fresh for the night," he said gently to Amma. "You like yellow?" Amma's eyes glistened. She nodded because nodding had become the safest language she spoke. They left to more small talk and the jangle of keys. The latch scraped, the door closed. Silence came back into the room and looked Nia in the face. She stepped forward like a diver breaking the surface. Her legs shook. The red pulse under the shelf winked at her once in understanding. She crouched, peeled the tape, lifted the little black ear into her palm. She moved to the bedroom and shut the door softly with her hip. Phone out, cable in. The file bloomed on the screen like a dark flower, minutes measured as lines of sound. She put in earbuds, pressed play. The room fell away. Every word stepped back through her, exact and intact. The phone chimed, the clock, the radio jingle, anchor point stitching sound to time. Her body trembled so hard the earbuds clicked against her teeth. She set the phone down to steady her hands and pressed upload. The bar crawled across the glass. She didn't breathe until it reached the far edge and turned from blue to done. Insurance, then. Thumb drive. She slid the cover back, slotted it in, watched the file copy. A second life for the truth. She wrapped the drive in a square of tissue and wedged it deep into the lining of Amma's brown coat. One she always reached for, even in warm months, because old habits don't check the weather. There was a small tear under the inside pocket. Nia fed the tissue parcel through, flattened the fabric, smoothed it, as if smoothing her own heartbeat. Eucalyptus had soaked into the coat over years. Now that clean scent would guard something else. Floorboard creak in the hall. Not the house. A step. She snapped the closet closed lightly and moved to the mirror, lifting her hair as if pinning it. The door opened. Kwame leaned in, framed like a portrait. Soft smile, steady eyes. "You're settling?" It was not a question. It was a pressure test. She let her face go slack with travel tiredness, found a soft line in her voice. Trying. She reached for the comb on the dresser. Her hand didn't shake. He came inside, stood behind her in the mirror, his presence carefully measured to be comforting. "It means everything to Amma to see you home." His reflection met her reflection. It was like looking at 2 masks and guessing which one could breathe. "We should plan a little gathering," he said, "for the community, for you, to put light in this house." Light. He used the word like currency. She watched his eyes. Somewhere behind the polish, calculation turned its gears. "Maybe," she said, letting the syllables sit there and give him nothing. He smiled, just enough. "Rest," he said, and his hand brushed the doorframe, a little ritual of ownership, before he left. His footsteps moved down the hall. The kitchen cupboard opened. A glass set on the counter with quiet precision. The faucet ran and stopped. The refrigerator door closed, seal sucking air with a soft kiss. The sounds of a good man making a night drink for his humble home. Her knees buckled then, just for a second, in the privacy of the room. She gripped the dresser until the wood pressed diamonds into her palms. Then she straightened, wiped her face with a clean section of sleeve, and looked herself in the mirror. A soldier looked back, a daughter wearing armor no one could see. She returned to the living room. Amma had drifted into a thin sleep, mouth slightly open, breath hitching. The new daisies stared, crude and bright. The trash can held the roses, heads broken, brown bruises open to air. Nia took one of the fallen petals from the rim and slid it into her pocket with its sister, tissue soft against her skin. Beauty, clipped, evidence, saved. She sat at the table and pressed play again, this time with the volume barely audible, as if the words might scatter if she played them too loud. She wrote nothing down. She needed to know it in her body, to be able to repeat it if paper was taken from her, if phones were lost, if power died. The sound of Zola's phone chiming wrapped around each line like twine. The clock ticked on. She timed her breath to it until her racing pulse matched the machine's calm march. The file sat in the cloud now, out of his reach, sitting in a place without doors he could lock. The drive sat in a coat that smelled like a tree in a childhood, and the kind of care that leaves a trace. The recorder itself, wiped clean, went into a drawer under dish towels. He could search the living room now and find nothing but a scatter of small lives. Spoons, a chipped plate, a tiny jar of cloves, a matchbook with 3 matches left. She placed it so casually that it belonged. Dark fattened in the windows. The neighborhood softened to the quiet of houses closing themselves. A child recited numbers somewhere, getting stuck at 8 and giggling. A radio preacher promised mercy with a voice like syrup. Nia turned the lamp down and watched the edges of the room melt closer. Her mother's hand twitched in sleep, and then stilled. Out in the corridor, the refrigerator hummed its low, stubborn hymn. The thought came to her then, clear as the digital timestamp on her phone screen. He wouldn't stop. He would make a story so convincing people would feel righteous repeating it. He had told her how he'd do it. The file held the blueprint. Her job was to make that blueprint visible to every eye he had charmed, and to do it in a way that left him no doors to slip through. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the recording play a 3rd time until she could hear each sentence before it arrived. At the end came those 4 words again, the ones that made her skin crawl and her spine harden. He had said them with the ease of a man closing a safe. She'll never know. She opened her eyes and stared into the dark. The coat in the corner waited like a witness with a secret in its chest. The little red light under the shelf had done its work and gone to sleep. The clock stuttered into the next minute and then the next. Her breath slowed. She lifted her mother's hand and pressed it to her cheek, and her cheeks were cold. No speech rose in her, no grand vow, just the steady click of resolve, simple as a lock turning. When he said she'd never know, he meant truth would stay blind, that the house would stay his stage, that praise would keep doing his work while he did his. She ran her thumb along the ridge of Alma's knuckles and felt the small, stubborn life there, and she thought, not this time, not in this house, not with me home. A breeze teased the thin curtain. The smell of earth slipped in, clean and familiar. Somewhere on the street a door banged, and a voice called good night. Nia leaned forward and kissed her mother's temple, tasting salt and eucalyptus and the long day that was ending. Her body trembled. Her eyes were dry. On the table, her phone's screen glowed once before dimming again. The file name shone, a date, a time, a word she chose that meant nothing and everything. She locked the phone and slid it under the folded tea towel. She stood, turned the lamp off, and let honest dark have the room. And in that dark, in the hush between the clock's ticks, his voice played again. Not in her ears, but in the walls, confident, careless, sure of its own echo. She'll never know. Her chest lifted, fell, and she let the words settle where they could not rot her. They settled like a weight she intended to use. She pressed the pedal in her pocket flat with her thumb until it creased and held its new shape. Then she sat very still beside her mother and stared into a space where there was nothing to see. And somehow, she saw everything that mattered. The plan was already forming, quiet, patient, ordinary, as setting a table. Her breath slowed to match the clock. Outside, the mango leaves whispered. Inside, the house waited, witness to a beginning invisible to anyone who hadn't learned how to listen. When sleep finally came, it was thin and watchful, the kind that wakes to the faintest sound. It carried with it the picture of a room full of people and a speaker with its own battery and a TV glowing with time. But that would be another night. For now, she held the coat secret and the cloud's copy and the matchbox recorder that had heard what the world refused to. She held them the way a soldier holds a map in her head and a daughter holds a hand. And as the last light bled out of the edges and darkness finished its slow work, her body trembled, her fingers tightened around Amma's, and her eyes, fixed on nothing, burned with a resolve so bright it felt like fire underwater. The night was a lantern-lit stage, voices spilling from doorways, the smell of roasted fish clinging to the air. Nia's hands tightened around the tray of cups she carried into the yard. Laughter swelled like a wave as more neighbors crossed the threshold. The long table stretched under the mango tree, its surface lined with borrowed plates, mismatched bowls, and the yellow daisies Kwame had insisted were bright enough to look like joy. Children ran between chairs, their bare feet thudding soft against the packed earth. To anyone watching, it was a reunion, a celebration, a family mending itself. To Nia, it was the battlefield she had prepared all week. Kwame appeared at the far end of the yard, Zola on his arm. They entered as though framed in light, he in a pressed shirt, she in a dress that shimmered faintly when the lanterns caught it. Applause broke out, some clapping softly, others rising to greet them. He lifted a hand in modest acknowledgement, the smile on his lips carved deep enough to convince anyone that it had never faltered. His eyes found Nia, warm and careful, the kind of gaze that made spectators lean forward and sigh at the sight of a marriage held strong. Amma sat at the head of the table, frail but upright, her shawl tucked neat around her shoulders. The lamp beside her gave her face a fragile glow, softening the lines that pain had carved. She tried to smile, but her hands twisted the fabric on her lap as if her body betrayed the calm she meant to project. "Let's eat," Kwame said, his voice carrying effortlessly. He poured water into Amma's cup with practiced reverence. "Together, we honor this house." The pastor lifted his hand to bless the meal. Voices quieted. Even the children stilled, their chatter dropping into the folds of the silence. The prayer was short, kind, thick with gratitude for family, for service, for community. Nia bowed her head like the rest, but her heartbeat thudded heavy against her ribs, counting down to the moment she had chosen. Plates filled. Laughter returned. Neighbors leaned close, telling stories. Kwame moved easily among them, shoulders loose, laughter timed with theirs. Zola whispered into the ear of a friend, eyes darting toward Amma, then back again with a smile meant to soothe suspicion before it even arose. Nia stood near the house, her hand resting on the table's edge. The recorder had done its work. The files were safe. Tonight wasn't about secrets hidden. Tonight was about secrets bared. She felt the USB in Amma's coat like a heartbeat, the cloud file resting beyond his reach like a sword at her side. Her plan was simple, but the weight of it pressed on her shoulders like armor. She drew in a breath, steadied her voice. and touched the small speaker she had hidden under the table. One click. The hum of conversation faltered. At first it was faint, a shuffle, a cough. Then Kwame's voice poured into the night, smooth and unguarded, the exact tone he had used in the living room. "People trust me," it said. His words floated over the table, undeniable. Heads turned, faces lifted, confused. Then Zola's voice followed, soft, conspiratorial, describing how they would call Amma's memory false, how they would frame Nia's service as abandonment. The air tightened, chairs creaked. Kwame froze. For a moment his face did not move. Then his hand shot forward, reaching under the table, ripping at cords. The sound cut. He straightened, breathing fast, a smile already shaping itself back onto his face. "Some mistake," he said lightly. "Children playing tricks." But Nia was already moving. From her pocket she drew the second speaker, its battery ready. She placed it squarely on the table where all could see and pressed play again. The same words filled the yard, this time louder, clearer, layered with the clock's steady tick and Zola's phone chiming in the background. The log of time stitched into sound, wrapped around the lies like chains. "No." Kwame's voice cracked, but not from the speaker, from his own throat. He reached for the device, but Nia's hand caught his wrist, mid-air. Her grip was steel, unshaken. She looked him in the eyes, and for the first time his gaze faltered. The pastor rose slowly, his chair scraping against stone. Around the table, voices hushed to nothing. Even the children pressed against their mother's skirts, sensing the storm in the air. Amma covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders trembling. The shawl slipped from her lap, and tears slid down her face, catching the lantern light. She whispered something that only Nia heard. "I told myself it was only in my head." The recording played on. Kwame's voice again. "She'll never know." The words stabbed the night open. Gasps broke out. Someone muttered, "Lord, have mercy." Zola's face drained of color. She grabbed for her bag, but a neighbor's hand pressed down on her arm, holding her in place. Kwame tore his wrist from Nia's grip and turned to the crowd, voice booming. "This is slander, edited lies. Amma is sick, confused. Nia has always resented me. She planted this." His voice cracked on the last word, but Nia didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply pressed play again, and the laugh that followed on the recording, Kwame's own, low and cruel, rolled out into the night like thunder. The yard fell into a silence so thick it smothered every excuse, every lie. Amma wept openly now, shoulders shaking. Neighbors exchanged looks, the kind that travel faster than words, stitching themselves into shared understanding. Zola's perfume felt suffocating, her eyes wild as she tried to stand. Kwame reached for her hand, but she pulled back, her breath ragged, her mask cracking. Nia looked at her mother, then at the circle of faces lit by lantern glow. She said nothing. The truth spoke louder than she ever could. The recording ended. The speaker clicked softly and fell silent. No one moved. Then the pastor spoke, his voice low, trembling, yet steady. "This house has been shown in one light to the world. Tonight, another light has been lit, and light cannot be hidden." Kwame's chest heaved, his hand trembling as he tried to lift the daisies from the table, as if flowers could restore what had shattered. But the stems snapped in his fist, petals scattering across the plates, their brightness suddenly grotesque under the heavy dark. Amma clutched Nia's hand with a strength Nia hadn't felt from her in months. The tears on her cheeks were not just grief. They were relief, raw and aching. She tried to speak but could only sob, her voice breaking into the air, her body shaking with the force of years unspoken. Every gaze turned on Kwame and Zola. Not admiration, not trust, judgment. The lanterns flickered as the night wind pressed against them. The long table, once full of warmth, sat heavy with silence and betrayal exposed. And as Amma leaned into Nia's shoulder, crying freely, Nia felt the battle shift. The masks had cracked. The war was no longer hidden. But the storm that followed would be fiercer than anything she had yet endured. The night ended not with words, but with silence, deeper than any prayer. A silence that carried the weight of shattered illusions and a question heavy in every chest. What would come when the masks finally fell to pieces? Kwame's fist struck the table so hard that cups rattled and water leapt from their rims. Lies! His voice cracked into the silence, too loud, too raw, like glass splintering under weight. Neighbors flinched. Children whimpered and pressed their faces into their mothers' skirts. Lantern light trembled, shadows shivering across faces already pale with disbelief. Amma sobbed openly, her frail shoulders shaking as she clung to Nia's hand. Her cries were not just grief, they were a release, the sound of chains snapping in her throat after years of swallowing silence. Kwame rose, chest heaving, his smile gone. "You planned this," he snarled, pointing at Nia, voice breaking into wildness. "You set me up. She's old, confused. His words tangled as the weight of the recording still echoed in the ears of every witness. Nia did not answer. She stood steady, her mother's hand tight in hers, her gaze fixed on him. She did not need to shout. The truth already screamed loud enough. The pastor's wife whispered, "Lord protect us," as she crossed herself. The murmur spread down the table like a ripple through tall grass. Then Nia moved. She lifted her phone, tapped the screen, and the second recording spilled into the night. Zola's voice this time, a half laugh, a breathy confession. "If people ask about us, we'll deny it. Rumors are a disease." The words landed like stones. Neighbors gasped, eyes darting between Zola and Kwame. A woman dropped her fork. The pastor pushed back his chair, rising slow but firm, his face lined with a sorrow that looked heavier than anger. "Enough," he said, his voice low yet sharp enough to cut the silence. "These things will not be ignored. I will call the council. There will be an inquiry, and until then, you," his eyes pinned Kwame, "will step down from every duty you have claimed in this community." Kwame's face drained, then flushed, fury and panic fighting for control. "You can't," but Zola broke first. She shoved back her chair with a screech, eyes wide, breath ragged. "I never wanted this," she shouted, her voice wild. "It was him. He told me." She caught herself too late, her hands trembling as she reached for her bag. But a neighbor blocked her path, eyes cold, voice steady. "Sit." Zola froze, the authority in that single word more binding than ropes. Kwame turned on her, his face contorting, betrayal twisting his mouth. "Coward," he spat under his breath. The yard was no longer his stage. The applause he once commanded had turned into a jury's gaze, eyes sharpened by disillusionment. The warmth that had always lifted him now suffocated him. Amma pressed her face into Nia's shoulder, whispering, "I thought no one would ever believe. Nia kissed her mother's damp hair, her own eyes stinging. "They see now," she murmured. Kwame tried again, desperation creeping in. "You think you've won? These people—" He swept his arm across the neighbors, the pastor, the families who had shared their evenings with him. "They don't understand. They've only heard fragments. You've twisted them." But before anyone could answer, an older man at the end of the table stood. His voice was gravel, but steady. "No," he said. "We know the sound of a man's heart when it beats in secret. We heard yours tonight, and it is rotten." The words hung, final, undeniable. Kwame's mask shattered then. His charm dissolved into something bare and ugly. He pointed at Nia, spit catching in the lantern light. "You think you've exposed me? You think this ends me? You don't know what I can do." The pastor stepped forward, his presence towering. "Enough," he thundered, louder than Kwame, louder than fear. "You will not raise your hand, not here, not tonight." Zola tried to slip away again, but the same neighbor blocked her, this time with others joining, their stance quiet but immovable. "Stay," one said. The tension stretched so tight it could have snapped the sky. Then Amma, weak and trembling, forced herself to her feet. Her shawl slipped to the ground, but she stood tall in her frailty, her eyes blazing with a courage no one expected. "You hurt me," she said, her voice breaking but strong enough to carry. "You broke my bones with words and with hands, and I bore it in silence. But my daughter has brought light, and light burns away shadows." The yard went utterly still. Even Kwame faltered at her words. Amma's tears ran, but her voice did not waver again. No more silence. Nia caught her mother's arm, steadying her as the strength bled from her body. Amma sank back into the chair, exhausted but unbowed. The neighbors looked at her with awe, with shame for not seeing sooner, with resolve building in their silence. Kwame's mouth opened, but no words came. Zola's face crumpled, her eyes darting like a trapped bird. The daisies on the table bent in the night wind, their brightness now obscene against the weight of what had been revealed. The pastor spoke again, softer now. "The truth has spoken. The rest will follow." The gathering broke slowly, people moving in hushed groups, whispers turning into low vows. Some touched Amma's shoulder with reverence. Others met Nia's eyes and nodded, a silent pledge of support. Kwame and Zola sat frozen, their empire of illusions collapsing around them. When the yard emptied, only lanterns remained, their flames low, their shadows long. Nia wrapped her arms around Amma, who wept quietly into her chest. For the first time, Nia felt the weight of victory, but it was jagged, incomplete, a blade that cut even as it freed. The night had ended one war, but its silence promised another. As the last lantern flickered out, the air held a single question, heavy and unresolved. What storm would rise when men like Kwame were cornered, stripped, and left with nothing but their rage? The clip began with a faint chime, the familiar jingle of the doorbell cam. Then Kwame's voice, raw, sharp, ugly, filled the room. "You should have died with him," it spat, followed by the hollow echo of his hand striking wood, and Amma's muffled sob. The crowd that had gathered around the table gasped. Some covered their mouths, others froze with their hands still on cups and plates. The footage projected on the television wasn't polished, wasn't staged. The grainy image showed the front step weeks ago, the clock glowing in the corner, the camera catching what no one was supposed to see. Kwame leaning over Amma, his face twisted, his voice dripping venom. The timestamp burned bright in the corner. Zola shifted in her seat, her eyes darting toward the door. But the neighbor who had stopped her before now stood closer, arms crossed, unyielding. There was no escape. Kwame's face drained of color. He lurched forward as if to rip the cord from the back of the TV. But Nia was already there, standing tall, remote in hand, her eyes steady. "This is not my word against yours," she said quietly. "This is truth, plain and unbroken." The footage rolled on. Kwame's insults rained in, each one sharper than the last. Amma covered her face, weeping openly, the sound unbearable in its familiarity. Nia slipped her hand into her mother's, grounding her. The neighbors' voices began to rise. One muttered, "I knew something was wrong." Another shook his head, anger edging his tone. The pastor, face heavy with sorrow, closed his eyes as if in prayer, then opened them again, clear and hard. "This," he said, pointing at the frozen image of Kwame's distorted face on the screen, "cannot be explained away. Not by charm, not by sermons, not by flowers and photographs. We have seen with our own eyes." Kwame tried to speak, but his voice cracked, no longer steady, no longer rehearsed. She provoked me." "No." The pastor's voice cut him off, sharp as a blade. "You provoked yourself, and you will answer for it." For the first time, the man who had built his life on applause and admiration sat in silence, stripped of both. Zola trembled beside him, her hand clutching her bag as though it might still carry her away. Nia stepped closer to her mother. Amma leaned against her shoulder, whispering through tears, "I thought no one would believe." "You don't need to prove anything anymore," Nia murmured back. "The proof speaks itself." The pastor turned to the crowd. "There will be a meeting, an inquiry. He will not lead us, not one more day. We will not let shadows grow under the roof of this house again." Kwame's breath came hard, like a caged animal. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for a single ally. He found none. Neighbors who once praised him now looked away in shame or stared with fury. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers folded their arms. Young men whispered to each other about what justice would look like. Amma sobbed again, her tears flowing freely. But they were different now. They carried release, not just pain. Her shoulders trembled, yet the grip of her hand in Nia's was stronger than it had been in months. The clip ended. The screen went black. Silence fell heavier than sound. Kwame rose, unsteady, his chest heaving. "You think this ends me?" he hissed. "You think a few minutes of tape erases all I've built? You don't know what I'm capable of." His voice cracked, desperation seeping through the cracks in his pride. Zola tried to stand, but again she was stopped. A neighbor's voice, firm but calm, said, "Not tonight, not until this is answered." The night air pressed against the walls of the house, as though the darkness outside wanted to creep in and finish what the light had begun. Nia stood, her hand still wrapped around her mother's. Her voice, low but steady, cut through the silence. "This isn't about what you've built. It's about what you've destroyed." Kwame faltered, his breath stuttering. For the first time, he had no mask, no script, no shield. Amma leaned against Nia, her whisper trembling but fierce. "You don't need weapons," she said. "You only ever needed the truth." Nia closed her eyes, holding her mother's hand tighter. The guests began to leave in silence, one by one, not with laughter but with the weight of witnessing. Some placed a hand on Amma's shoulder as they passed. Others nodded to Nia with quiet respect. No one said farewell to Kwame or Zola. The daisies on the table had begun to droop, their stems broken from Kwame's hand earlier. Petals scattered across the plates like fragments of a shattered mask. The roses in the trash, now brown and wilted, gave off a faint, sour odor. When the last neighbor had gone, the house fell into a hush. The lanterns flickered, their light barely holding back the dark. Kwame and Zola slipped out without a word, their departure marked only by the sound of the latch scraping and the hollow echo of footsteps fading into the night. Nia turned to her mother. She lifted Amma into her arms and carried her to the couch, wrapping her in the shawl that had slipped earlier. Amma clung to her, tears dampening the fabric. For the first time, Nia let herself cry too, quiet, steady tears that slid down her cheeks and into her mother's hair. The truth had been spoken, the masks had been stripped, but as she looked into the darkness outside, she felt the storm still waiting, coiled and ready. The night ended with mother and daughter holding each other in the dim glow, neighbors already planning silent visits to keep Amma safe, a community rising from betrayal. Justice had not come from a court or a gavel. It had come from courage, from truth, from the voices of those who chose to see. And in that quiet, Nia felt both the weight of victory and the shadow of what was still to come. The house was no longer his stage, but what battles would begin beyond its walls? The darkness pressed against the window, waiting, as if to remind her. Some wars end not with explosions, but with silence heavy enough to break a heart. In the end, every story of struggle leaves behind more than scars. It leaves a map that shows where fear once held power, where silence once swallowed voices, and where the courage of truth finally broke through. It teaches us that darkness does not always roar like a storm. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, disguised as comfort, polished as kindness, praised as virtue. But no matter how carefully lies are arranged, light always waits for its moment to arrive. This story reminds us that cruelty often hides in plain sight, and that the strength to face it rarely comes with loud declarations. It comes in the smallest acts of endurance, in the quiet resilience of those who refuse to let injustice be the last word. It comes when one person dares to stand still against the tide of appearances, when they choose patience over fury, truth over fear, love over resignation. There are wounds the world cannot see, wounds carried in silence because the risk of speaking feels heavier than the pain itself. Yet when even one person listens, truly listens, the silence begins to crack, and once truth has been spoken aloud, no matter how much others may try to deny it, the echo lingers. It reshapes communities. It awakens conscience. It restores dignity to those who thought it forever lost. Perhaps the deepest lesson here is that justice is not always about courts or verdicts. It can be found in the collective gaze of a community that finally sees what it had ignored, in the shared decision to believe the quiet truth over the loud performance. Justice sometimes arrives not with fanfare, but with neighbors taking shifts at a bedside, with whispers of solidarity, with small, steadfast acts of care that cannot be staged or faked. In every age, in every place, there will be those who hide behind masks of generosity, who cultivate reputations brighter than their hearts, and there will be those who suffer in their shadows, convinced they are alone. But stories like this remind us that shadows are never permanent. Light needs only one crack, one hand steady enough to hold the lantern, one voice refusing to be silenced. And when the light comes, it spreads. It does not simply expose, it heals. It gathers the broken, binds wounds, and reshapes what was thought beyond repair. It teaches us that love is not weakness. It is the fiercest defiance against cruelty. That truth, though fragile, is unstoppable once set free. That silence, though heavy, can be shattered with one act of courage. So may this story be more than a tale you have heard. Let it be a mirror, a reminder, a call to notice what is hidden in plain sight around us. May it move us to choose empathy over apathy, action over indifference, truth over comfort. For when we choose to see, to speak, to stand, we take part in the slow but certain triumph of light over shadow. Thank you for walking through this journey with us, for opening your heart to its weight and its hope. If it touched you, if it stirred reflection in you, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, to join the conversation, and to subscribe, so that together we can continue to explore stories that remind us of our shared humanity, our strength, and our unbreakable capacity for compassion.